I'm delighted to have with us here today, I'm so excited about this one, Claire Martirana, who is the Federal Chief Information Officer at the Executive Office of the President in the United States of America. And we have already met this morning Catherine Luelo, who's Chief Information Officer for the Government of Canada. So a huge round of applause, please, because it's not often we get these two together. And am I right in saying that you haven't actually been together yet? This is the first time that you've met in person?
Today, yes.
Yes,
yeah.
Fantastic. So as we have you here and you oversee everything, the two of you, we thought we would have a general conversation and then open up to questions from the floor. So one of the things that I'm interested in, and it's kind of come out in some of the sessions that we've had today as well, is that difference between the private sector and the public sector and some of the unique challenges of the public sector when it comes to digital transformation. And you both have private sector backgrounds. So I'm just interested in what were your first impressions when you came to the public sector? Do you think it's harder? You know, what are the kind of unique things that you found? Claire, we'll start with you.
There were a lot of acronyms. I had never seen as many. It was incomprehensible at moments, but quickly kind of gained my footing. I think that transition was a wonderful opportunity to lean into the things that I think make you a good public sector or private sector leader, which is listening, right? Listening to the people who have been there and done that, and recognizing that most likely I was not coming in with the eureka idea, that a lot of the really good ideas had been thought of, but most of the time they hadn't been able to be fully executed. So I tried to understand why we didn't make progress on some of the things that seemed to be logical, but there were lots of reasons for that, which I know you know.
So not short of ideas in the public sector, but maybe don't have, for various reasons, the ability to follow through.
Yeah, and in the U.S. we have, you know, the unique complexities, but I think there are commonalities for many of us, which are, you know, funding. Yeah. Right? The way that our funding is allocated and having to get projects done over certain timelines, where in the private sector, I had the luxury of having a little bit more agility in the way that I could procure different solutions, or the, you know, how rapidly we could respond to a challenge or a threat or an opportunity.
Yeah, interesting. Catherine, was that similar for you, your impressions coming in?
It was, and in fact, I felt like I got my Government of Canada tattoo last week when I was in a meeting, and there was an entire sentence of acronyms, and I understood what they were saying. So that was a bit of an interesting kind of milestone for me. I couldn't agree more with what Claire said, and in fact, I'd add to it that we don't even use them the same across government. So one thing means it here, and it doesn't mean it there. I don't have a lot to add to what Claire has said. I think for me, I'm just over a year transitioning, so it's still pretty fresh and new for me. And maybe because I worked for large, heavily regulated industries, there was a familiarity around some of the standards and processes that we have in government. It felt a bit like a highly regulated environment. I would say probably the thing that I would just add to Claire is like a lot of meetings. Like there's a lot of talking about stuff, and maybe this is the sort of not failure to launch, but like the implementation is a challenge that I see, and I think it's because there's just different variables and pressures that drive performance. And I think, we've had a chance to have a little bit of a chat over the lunch hour here. Like, I think we both bring that lens in. I talked a bit about it in my opening comments this morning. Like, policy has to be about performance. So I couldn't agree more with what she said.
One thing that's come up in every session that we've been in is the challenge of recruiting and retaining great people, great experts into the public sector, because the pay isn't as much in the private sector as in the public sector, but also you can skill people up in the public sector and then they get nicked by the private sector. So how would you, having come from the private sector, how would you encourage people from the private sector maybe to come into the public sector? What do you think are the great things about working in the public sector?
I want Claire to talk because we talked about this over lunch, and I think what she has to say is fascinating. I just maybe one comment around, I was talking a little bit about my kids, like 21 and 24, and we were just observing the fact there's this whole generation of young people that are coming up that really have a different social conscience and really want to change the world. And I think the work that we get to do in public service, like there is no more noble thing. Like we work on files that are appealing to people in technical worlds. And so I think, from a Canada perspective, part of my job is to go out and tell that story of like, do you want to work on defending our country? Do you want to work on making sure our most vulnerable parts of our population have got the services they need? And those are things that I think are incredibly important to Canadians. So I think for me, we've got to tell our story about the impact of the work we have. But, I'd love to give Claire the floor because I know she's doing some very cool things in the U.S.
Yeah, the workforce is one of my favorite topics because the younger workforce that we have the benefit of being able to work with, not in everywhere in the U.S., but in certain pockets, they are so mission focused. We win hands down on mission.
Yeah.
I had an experience at the Department of Veterans Affairs. We launched a new website, and we were watching the first users use a healthcare application, which was previously on paper that was digitized. And we watched the first person complete it. Obviously, we were all excited. And about an hour later, I saw a young lady, and she was crying. And I was like, well, are you okay? And she just said, I just spent 3 years optimizing a shopping cart, and I never helped a person. And this is the first time I ever got to actually help a person do a thing that was so important for them. And that has just really stayed at the center of my consciousness, that young people want mission-based work. And in government, in both of our governments, it can be across the entire spectrum. It doesn't matter. It can be in energy. It can be in finance. It can be in, normal communities of practice for customer experience that could go across any business sector. And so I just see this enormous opportunity for young people coming into government. And also, I consider myself a perennial. Right? You bloom every year, hopefully.
Like that.
And like, we can also learn. So you can also really invigorate and motivate people who have maybe been at a job a long time. When they get to work with newer technology in a more agile way, they actually get to grow as well. And that's exciting.
Oh, I love that. On that message of making people's lives better, you're doing something to make people's lives better. How do you think, this is a big question, how do you think digital transformation in government actually does ultimately improve people's lives? And how far on that journey do you think we've gone, and what potential is there to go even further? Claire, I'll come to you first, and then Catherine.
The pandemic changed everything, right? Their expectations of every sector of society. We were confined to different locations, and people are interacting with technology really differently. So I can order a salad, know when it's within 2 feet of me, and know the name of the person who's delivering it to me. Right? So those expectations are at a different place, and digital transformation, our government services and our service delivery has to evolve to meet those needs. But we do have a lot of legacy systems and challenges in actually fulfilling some of those aspirations. And one of the things that I have seen work in several agencies in the US is we still have back-end systems that are a bit clunky. And they will be modernized over time, but we are actually not limiting the front end. And we're trying to improve service delivery on the front end, where previously the way that, again, the budgets worked, we would have to do the whole thing. And that might take 7 years to modernize this gigantic system. And we're kind of trying to bureaucracy hack ourselves and say, are there actually ways that we can deliver these services more efficiently using digital tools that are available so that we can leapfrog and and start the gears of digital transformation working. Because once you start turning those gears, you
Other
create
stuff follows.
momentum,
Yeah.
and other things do start to happen, which is impactful.
Yeah. Catherine, what do you see as the biggest benefits?
Well, I feel the biggest benefit is I've met Claire, because I feel like I have a support group of exactly what we're going through at the Government of Canada. We're having a bit of a chuckle over lunch about this. Like, look, we're at the beginning of the beginning in Canada on this, and there's been some, I think, really great work done during COVID in particular, where we have had teams do miraculous things to deliver programs to Canadians with really difficult systems. And so I think that has tuned up the system, that technology, digital data is not something we have to do. It's something we must do as part of us delivering services to Canadians in a digital age. Like, it's a table stake. Very similar to what Claire talked about, we're exactly looking at how do we create some front-end magic for people, while just acknowledging the fact we've got some of these back-end issues. One of the things I'm thinking about a little bit is the whole data environment in this legacy environment. And, we've got to press ourselves in terms of how we handle data migration, old systems to new systems, because 100% of the time I have been caught on data migration, and it is a very difficult part of these large, complex modernization projects. And so I think, asking ourselves different questions around where we house data, what we move to new systems, can we move faster by perhaps having a sun-setting, sun-rising environment? Those are the types of conversations that we're having around transformation. And I can't talk about transformation without noting that the biggest challenge I see ahead of us from a Canadian government perspective, as Claire said, like, resources are finite. That's not just financial resources, that's human resources and people. And the ability and desire to simplify things so you're not building kind of your mess someplace else is prioritization. Like, we have got to be disciplined around deciding what we're going to do and do well, and then be focused on implementation and delivery. So that's probably the only add I would make.
Well, you mentioned there the kind of the management of data and transitioning from old systems to new systems. And again, this has come up in a lot of the conversations we've had this morning, that the more we digitalize services, issues around data security, issues around privacy come up. So how would you guys, sitting where you both do, what would your messages be to the public in terms of reassuring them that systems are robust, that they are, they can withstand kind of attacks, but also that the government can be trusted with their data as we bring more and more different data sets together?
Yeah, that's a really important question. When I think of Maslow's hierarchy, which we use as a reference like daily, security is a foundation. Full stop. We focus on cybersecurity every single day as the core part of our jobs. And we focus on delivering tools and services that are simple, seamless to the data point, and secure. And those things have to work together. You can't build your systems in isolation and bring in the security team later. You actually have to have your SREs and your other competencies at the table when you're trying to determine the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most important lessons that I have learned over my career, is bringing product people into the conversation, who are kind of that in the middle then of the business issues that you're trying to solve, the customer experience issues that you're trying to solve, and the security issues that you have to safeguard. But I think it's up to us to make sure that we are good stewards of the data that is entrusted to us, and that we are able to demonstrate that by our systems being up, secure, and that we are transparent about what we're doing with the data that is entrusted to us.
Thanks. Catherine, do you feel the same? I mean, one way we put it in our last session was, are the public justified in being a bit worried about all of this data that government holds about them?
Yeah, I think, Claire's summarized it very well. And certainly from a Government of Canada perspective, we've got, much like our US counterparts, we've got some tools within how we manage our perimeter that are unique. And, we've done a good job within Canada of building a good, I guess, wall around the kingdom, for lack of a better way of saying it, so that we have good visibility around what's coming in. I think that from an overall building by design, same thing. I would say that, one of the mantras that I'm starting to get a lot of energy around is that there is a tremendous amount of education that needs to go on, both within government for those that actually work with the data day to day that we're provided and given the privilege of housing for Canadians, but also for Canadians. You talk about information, disinformation. That is a topic that I think each of us in this space need to take an active role. If you have an opportunity in your community organizations, in the sports clubs, at your kids' school, to take an opportunity to improve digital citizenship within the country, it's a sort of a double edged sword in that the government is doing all responsible things to protect your data, building security by design. I think we have an accountability to be transparent with some, certain exceptions around security and things like that, to let Canadians know what data we have and what we're using it for. I think that's an important principle as we continue to move into a more digital world. But it is also, I think, important for us to support Canadians, and I mean right up to the first time that kids get their hands on devices, which is younger and younger. We teach digital skills and data hygiene and stewardship as much as we teach math and science and English and French and all the other things that we teach in school. So for me, having equipped Canadians to participate in the democracy of data is really an important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and to build on, Catherine, what you were saying a little bit there, in the U.S., the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, uses this term. He says, you have to beat all of us to beat one of us, right? That we really have to build the competencies amongst our own communities in our own government, and then extending that into education in schools and teaching kids about digital security. And I would ask a simple question of this audience, like, who's updated their iOS for the new Apple release for iOS 16? But not all of us,
Please
right?
Go do it.
When the new security comes out, we should update. We have to
do the basics.
Yes, I was going to say eat our own dog food, which is probably inappropriate, but
completely appropriate.
Drink our own champagne, use some other analogy, but we have to do that too, and that's important for us to be leading. We do this in my own team at meetings. We challenge each other of who's done what thing that are really basic common sense that we should all.
So we're going to come to the audience in just a second, so be thinking about your questions. But one very final quick question from me is that digitalization obviously doesn't come cheap. So you need to invest, as we've heard today, in systems, upgrading historic systems, legacy systems. You need to invest in your people, in new technology. And I mean, the global economic system is tight. As finances and public sector finances get really, really tight, people can retract into their silos, all of that. But does the public sector have the money it needs to invest in the full digital potential that we would like it to? Catherine, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I do think there's probably some similarities as Claire's going to talk. This is a topic that we chatted about over lunch. My sense is that dollars are not going to be the pacing item. It's going to be talent. And it's going to be our discipline to actually simplify things so that we don't build a slightly better version of yesterday, that we actually build it with a view of a truly digital end-to-end experience. And that, to me, is going to be the pacing item. I think that the other piece, and it's really probably one of the advantages and disadvantages of coming from a private sector background, I really do think we have to have the conversation of funding your own digitization. And there's going to need to be certainly seed money that goes into that, but you don't just modernize for the purpose of modernizing. You modernize to deliver better service, better policy, better programs, and in some cases to retire old stuff. And trust me, I know how difficult it is to decommission. Like, that's not something people love to do. But we need to start looking at the ability for us to harvest savings out of this system, similar to what we did in private sector, and that you need some sort of out-of-the-gate funding, but there should be discipline around how do you actually start to self-fund. And I do think, a year in, so take that as musings of someone a year in, there's a substantial opportunity to do that.
Interesting. Claire?
Yeah, I think that there's absolutely, we're going to let the pipes be broken and leak on the wall, and we're going to fix the wall 30 times before we fix the pipes. So we have a choice to make, that we're either going to lean into doing that work, which isn't sexy. I kind of think it is, but some other people might not. But
we have headsets on, so
we're
nerds,
cool. and we think this stuff is really wonderful. But I think it's really important that we focus on the infrastructure, the security, because we do spend money. We do the same thing in the United States. Everybody thinks they're special and that their business need is unique. And we customize every single system that we have, when we could probably get 80% there with some uniformity and then customize later. So Catherine and I were discussing at lunch, business process reengineering. Like, you can't do the same old thing with new technology. You have to really question what you're doing, think about that business process, how technology is going to enable it, and change. And that's the hardest thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those brilliant insights there and thoughts. We have got just under 10 minutes left for some questions, which is fantastic. So please raise your hand.
Is anyone still awake out there? It's after lunch, so you're
There were
probably all
big
sitting there
cookies.
like
There were lots
this.
of cake and cookies at lunch. I think a hand came up here, or was that somebody just saying they're still awake? There's a hand over there. Sorry, gentleman there, and one here at the front, and then I'll come back here after.
Hi, Ahmed Al-Magrawi, SSC. I believe strongly that digital transformation based on 3 pillars.
I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Do you mind holding the mic? Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, I believe strongly that digital transformation based on 3 pillars. One of them is IA, big and quality data and automations. So my question to the panels: what's the issue and the challenge that delay digital transformations?
So what are the biggest challenges in delaying digital transformation? We'll hold that one for a second, and we'll take this one down here as well.
We had a lot of conversation about internal processes and procedures, but one thing that didn't really come up clear today is third-party service delivery. And how do you build digital enablement and push your service provider to improve service over 10, 20-year contract, and really look at agility and customer service and design when you sort of have to set up front what your 10, 20 years expectations are.
Great, thank you. So 2 great questions. So what are the biggest challenges, and then how do you get the transformation right down to service design and across the whole process? Who would like to go first? Catherine.
Well, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, my head was going, the tech doesn't scare me, the humans scare me. It was exactly how I was thinking about it. So for me, I think one of the largest barriers, so you can call that an opportunity if you want to be more positive, that we have in public service is the discipline around scoping, the discipline around decision making, making sure that we put the right kind of top resources on these types of programs. And I always used to say in my private sector life, I want the person that hurts when you move them. Like, that's the person that needs to be on this initiative. So, like for me, that's a big part of it. Just to pick up a little bit on your point, when you think about the vendor ecosystem and how you actually get performance, listen to them. Oftentimes we get very good advice from our partners, sometimes not so much, but most of the times I find we get really good global advice from our partners, and then we talk ourselves into, but we're special, and it's different, and you don't understand. And so I often say to our core partners, some of who are in the room today, you need to tell me what I want. You need to tell me not what I want to hear, even if you think that's going to annoy me, because that's actually the thing I need to hear.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think, a 20-year contract kind of terrifies me, right? So I think just procurement in general, we have to work closer as partners. So again, I would just encourage you, when you're kicking off a project, have everyone in the room on your team. Bring the procurement team along with you. Bring your finance team along with you. They will help you avoid those pitfalls of doing things in ways that we did years ago when we did a 10-year project, right? I could not even imagine what a 10-year project looks like at this point in my career with what I'm seeing. So I would just really encourage you, start at the beginning and then work collaboratively with your procurement partners, because you might have to rewrite a contract in the middle of something if something isn't working. But to Catherine's really good point, we couldn't survive in the United States in our digital ecosystem without extraordinary contracting partners and technology partners. They are what is powering all of our ability to get our work done. We have less federal employees doing work and more contract support supporting us. So it's really important to be a great partner to them as well, right? It goes both ways. They have to be great partners to us, but we also have to not customize every single thing and try and make progress.
Thanks. So we had 2 questions here. We will take those 2 as well. Do you want to stand up when you ask the question? I've just been, thank you.
Hello. My question is about service delivery. So we usually do digital transformation as a service for citizens. And most of the time in digital transformation, the focus is on the program, the policy, the main core of whatever ministerial process we are. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
But all those policies and programs, they're also served by other services within any. So my question is, how do we focus also on ourselves rather than also on just the clients? Because I see sometimes that digital transformation is mostly about others and not ourselves. So we lack a lot of business intelligence, I find, is really lacking in those areas. So I was wondering if you have any tricks or...
Okay, and then was there a question right next to you? Thanks.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, but I'm not going to ask a question about privacy.
Thank you.
It's off topic a little bit, but every time you say resources, and we're talking about financial resources, we're talking about human resources, but I think about sustainability and, we're talking about innovation and acceleration and progress, but I contend that the critical mineral resources that go into our chips and into our phones, that 20, 30 years from now, we're gonna see the human impact of all this mining, and we're gonna open our eyes and see cloud as server farms, and that's gonna hit us like a ton of bricks, and kind of, I'm not going to stop it as one person, but I do see this every time that I see this energy. And so perhaps this place with this enthusiasm and these people is the right space to be asking this question.
Thank you. 2 really interesting questions. So one, how do you think about yourself and the systems, not just kind of end service delivery? But that question is interesting there because quite often digitalization is posed as a positive for sustainability, but you're saying are you thinking as well about the impact itself of digitalization on our kind of net zero ambitions and all of that? So, and we've only got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I think from good human-centered design for the first question is making sure that you're a stakeholder in the conversation, right? Because delivering, the North Star should be delivering the service to the customer, right? But there are other stakeholders and customers in that journey. And so again, having the right people in the room from the problem identification and the start of creating the problem solution is really important. Your employees are customers, right? Like you can't forget that. So they're also really critical key stakeholder. And then to the second question, I would just say, I think we're going to continue to see enormous innovation in the green energy space for data centers, for example. There's a lot of activity in that, and I think hopefully that will come up in other conversations that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to build on, I agree with you. Like, we can't forget about public servants and the tools they need to do their job. And I spent some of my career at WestJet, and it was a mantra there. You take care of the team, and they take care of everything else. So know that that was drilled into my head as part of being a WestJetter for part of my career. And I do think that we send messages internally to government when we don't have good quality tools and good quality systems that serve our employees. So that is something that is top of my mind. Second item, I spent some time a couple weeks ago with a firm that's out of Quebec that's doing some interesting work around data centers and using it to actually do a circular heating and basically building or growing tomatoes in plants. And so it's a system that runs itself. So to Claire's point, there's lots of innovation starting to go on in this space. I think this generation of young folks coming up are going to hold us accountable to this. So this is a live conversation around my dinner table that I get from my 21 and my 24-year-old. And thanks for sharing the fact that you're with OPC. I think didn't ask a question about it, but the commissioner and certainly that office are a big part of the engagement on digital more generally, because I think we need to do it together. And so I just ask you to carry back that message that we will continue to work in the way we're working with the OPC. We think they're a super important stakeholder in how we show up for Canadians in this space. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, sadly, we are out of time. I can't imagine how busy you both are at the moment, but I know it's going to be incredibly busy. So thank you so much for giving us your time today, for sharing your insights with us. And I think you probably will be around for a little while if people want to come up and ask you some questions as well. So I'm sure you will join me in saying a big thank you to Claire and Catherine.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.